One of the scenes in the Gospels which staggers me, it comes right at the end, just before Jesus is taken to be crucified. He's meeting with his disciples. It's the Last Supper scene, that beautiful passage from John 13 to 17. And in the middle of that discourse, Jesus says these ringing words. He says, "I have overcome the world." And I'm sure to the disciples listening at the time, they thought, yeah, we're going to win. He's got it. Later that night, the next day, what they see is, instead of overcoming the world, he's overcome by the world. He's crucified. He's dead. And I'm sure they're staring at that cross, this pale, naked figure covered with blood, thinking, overcome the world? Just last night he was telling us he had overcome the world. But of course it was a different kind of overcoming that Jesus had in mind.
When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left.
The death, the crucifixion of Jesus was an epic that changed the face of the universe, because there was something happening on that hill outside Jerusalem that was much bigger than a man dying. It was all about Jesus bearing the sin of the world, taking the things I've done wrong and saying, I'll pay the price. And that's why it was such a big thing, because in that moment God is saying sin has to be paid for, things I do wrong have to be sorted, and Jesus was doing that.
It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, for the sun stopped shining. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last.
Think of him on the cross. I remember one of my earliest memories was thinking it was like they were killing Superman. At any moment Superman can just wipe out all his enemies. All he needs to do is just beam them with his laser vision. Well, it was a bit similar to that on the cross. He looks so weak, Jesus, but at any moment he could have just said, it is finished, I'm wrapping up human history, I'm going to destroy the earth. But he doesn't. He holds back his power, and it's his love that keeps him on the cross for us, dying in our place.
Jesus wasn't murdered by the Romans, he wasn't murdered by the Jews, he actually willingly gave his life. And although they were instruments, as were the crowds, of his getting to that cross, in actual fact Jesus knew, I've got to give my life because that's the price of sin.
He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again.
Imagine I'm up before the courts, I've done wrong and I plead guilty. Then the judge comes in to pronounce sentence, and I realise it's my favourite uncle. I think, well, that's all right, he's going to look after me. But he fines me a big fine, the proper fine for the offence. I think, well, uncle, you've stood for justice and truth, but where's mercy? Where's love? I thought you cared for me. Then imagine that the judge, my uncle, says, well, look, I have had to fine the right amount, but now I'm going to come down with my chequebook, write out a cheque for that fine and pay it myself. Will you take my cheque? And I think it's a picture of what Jesus did on the cross. He said, sin matters, everything wrong we've ever done matters, but he says, I will pay the price for you. Now that's a great offer, fantastic, if it's true. And we need to know that it actually is true, that Jesus did die on a cross for us so we can be forgiven and rise to life again.
We have about 17 or 18 sources for the historical Jesus, and I'm counting archaeology as well as people who write, and the majority are writers. Every one of these dozen and a half approximately sources, every one is non-Christian. Every one tells a little bit of the picture. Secondly, they report his miracles. They report the claims to deity and that the early church believed he was deity, and they report the resurrection. And I will tell you that the fact that's most reported in the non-Christian sources, the death of Jesus, it occurs in 12 of the dozen and a half sources. So about 2/3 record his death.